Hey everybody, Mooseberry here from World of Enders. Today I wanted to talk to you about a couple of builds that I like to use and I want them to be good, but are not quite there in terms of rating meta. So the two builds are Condi Guardian and Condi Elementalist. Condi Elementalist is actually a lot closer to meta than Condi Guardian, but I like Condi Guardian more anyway, so I'll talk about that first. So Condi Guardian does, for me at least, the way I play it, does approximately 27k DPS on a golem with realistic buffs. So that's not quite there. The one benefit that Condi Guardians have compared to basically any other build is that the damage it does increases for the amount of targets it's hitting. So like if it's hitting one target, it does the 20 set single target DPS, 27k on a golem. Obviously, if it's moving around in a raid situation, you'll probably get lower DPS, but 27k on a goal. Now, two targets, that'll go up quite a bit because of certain traits that you take that buff your Virtue of Justice. I've gone over this with Wood Potatoes in that Pheasant Guardian build, and it applies to rating as well. So let's go over the build real quick. So it's actually a standard Guardian, it's not Dragon Hunter. You will be going Virtues, Master of Consecration, which makes your Purging Flames last longer. Last longer, and also reduces the recharge. It's really the recharge that you care about because it's quite a damaging skill, 20,000 fire damage on a 28-second recharge with the Consecration's Mastery. Then this trait, you actually could pick whichever one you want. I use Absolute Resolution because it helps in certain situations and raids. And then finally, the most important skill for the build is Permeating Wrath. Virtue of Justice passive effect no longer only burns your target, it also burns the area around your target each time it activates. And it also causes burning more frequently. So it reduces the amount of attacks to trigger from 5 to 3. And more importantly, each strike is counted individually. So if you're doing an AoE attack like Symbol of Punishment, or just your sword auto attacks, or even Cleansing Flame, which hits 3 targets 10 times. So the more targets in your attack, the more hits your Permeating Wrath gets, and the more AoE damage happens, AoE fire damage happens. So if you have 3 targets that are getting attacked at the same time, all within the radius, you will every time you hit those 3 targets at the same time, they'll each take 1 stack of burning instead of once every 3 attacks. So essentially, you're tripling the damage from Virtue of Justice. And Virtue of Justice does represent a good chunk of the damage in this build. I think, based off of AoE attacks, the Virtue of Justice damage is somewhere around 5k, 6k damage. So that is the multiplier that you'll be getting for every additional target. So you're attacking 1 target, you're doing 27k damage. If you're attacking 2 targets, you're probably doing more like 32k damage, obviously just in in DPS Golem scenarios. And if you're attacking 3 targets, it would be like 37k damage. So that's the benefit it has over other builds, but when it's already at 27k damage as a baseline, it's too low to get this into the meta right now. Then we got Radiance. You have 15% extra critical hit chance with your attacks because you're using one-handed weapons. Radiant Fire, that makes your Torch, Zealot's Flame, and Zealot's Fire very good. Basically double activation on it. And then Amplified Wrath, also it increases the duration of burning. And Amplified Wrath increases the damage from burning. And then you have Zealous Scepter. Actually, that's not good. You want Fiery Wrath. I don't know, that was there. It was, I guess, from PV that I was using. Fiery Wrath, 70% damage, 7% damage extra on burning targets. Also, you're going to be using condition damage based on your power you get. And finally, interestingly enough, Expedious Spirit is quite a good skill right now. There's a few other options, but this one is the one I'm using because it, paired with just 1 Sword of Justice, increases your DPS output by quite a bit. just letting it auto attack. Don't even use the on command ability. Just letting it auto attack increases your DPS by quite a bit. Before showing you the rotation, I think I want to just go over a couple of places where they could increase the DPS to make this more viable. One option would be here in Permeating Wrath from Virtues. Well, it's more along the Virtue of Justice. So right now with... Oops, I don't have my food on. Where is that? With 100% burning duration, the duration of your passive effect burning is only 4 seconds. It's a 2-second baseline. In PvP, they upped that from a 2-second baseline to a 4-second baseline. If they brought that over to PvE, it would double the damage from your Virtue of Justice, and that would definitely bring Condi Guardian in line with the other builds for some of the top tier DPS. However, if they do that, I understand that if they do that, they're going to be buffing Power Guardian too hard. Because right now, Power Guardian, I think has, when they're doing their stuff, they're doing like 30-something K DPS, but some of that DPS is from this Virtue of Justice. So I think maybe 3K, 4K is from that Virtue of Justice. So if they increase the duration of Virtue of Justice, they'll be getting a 3K buff, maybe a 4K buff as well. And then they would be way too far and above the highest DPS at that point. So I can understand why they don't want to buff this like they did in PvP, but that would be like the quickest solution to make Condi Guardian more viable. Another option is giving more useful spirit weapons to the Condi Guardian. So right now, the only useful one is Sword of Justice. And also, you know, some people might say the Hammer of Wisdom is also pretty good. It is pretty good. It's not quite as strong as Sword of Justice. And it's just, you know, a little more clunky to use. But if there was one more weapon, say an elite weapon, that's a spirit weapon, maybe an elite staff spirit weapon that did some burning damage, I'm just suggesting that maybe that's a great idea, and that would be very good, because right now all the other elites aren't so good for this build. Although it is helpful in a raid situation to keep on passively healing people 808, but that's another story. Okay, so that is the build traits. You're also going to be using the Sword of Justice with that 4,000 damage burning on each hit. That's also AoE, kind of. It's number of targets 3. Purging Flames, you're going to be using that off cooldown. This is just to buff your condition damage a little bit more. This is to power through some of the retaliation, let's say, on Gorseval. And your choices for your elite are slim. You could use Signet of Courage to just sort of apply healing to all your friends. If everybody gets low, you might be able to pull off some massive heal that makes people really happy about you, but it's unlikely. Another thing is Feel My Wrath. Quickness and Fury to give to people isn't so bad. Usually in a raid group, you're going to not need that because everybody's going to be topped off anyway, but it's not terrible. But yeah, so there you go. So I'm going to talk about the rotation real quick. Basically, you're going to be using Symbol of Punishment off cooldown. You're going to be throwing your Zealot's Flame, using it and throwing it as often as possible. When you're on Scepter Torch, you can use your Cleansing Flame because it is basically the same, sometimes a little bit more damage than your Orb of Wrath auto attack. But when you're on your Sword Torch, you're not going to be using your Cleansing Flame because the auto attack from the sword is more damage. But again, you're going to be using this off cooldown when you're on this off cooldown, and you're going to be using this off cooldown as well. But you're going to be weapon swapping every time your weapon swap is off cooldown as well. And the reason is because one of your things is Geomancy, and that's going to be giving you about 1,700 extra DPS just from weapon swapping every 10 seconds. That brings me to gear, actually, real quick. Phalanx, I'm using... Actually, there's like 3 different options for gear. The one I'm using is playing into the Geomancy sigils. What it is I'm using Viper's gear and Geomancy and Smoldering, and basically because it's Viper's gear, your burning duration is 100%, but your bleeding duration is also quite high. However, if they buff this Virtue of Justice passive, it might be worth it just to get rid of the Geomancy Sigil and go for a Sigil of Bursting or something like that. And then dropping the full-on Viper's gear, going for maybe Sinister's gear instead, instead of Berserker runes, you would go with Balthazar runes. And with Balthazar runes and Sinister, you're going to have your 100% burning duration. Your base condition durations can be much lower, but all you're going to be doing is burning damage anyway. And in that case, your condition damage would be higher than it is currently with this build. So you're going to be going all in and burning, and that might be worth it. Okay, I'm going to, I guess, in the background, I'm probably playing the rotation for this. As you can see, it's around 26k damage. Also, just to let you know, I don't know if I'm going to play it also. Yeah, I'm going to play it also, I guess. If you, instead of doing Sword Torch as your offhand, you could do Great Sword instead. The DPS is approximately the same, maybe slightly smaller, but approximately the same. But the rotation just feels a lot smoother to me. However, because it's so smooth and like all perfectly timed, if in a raid situation you mess it up because you're out of position or whatever, or you have to do something else, it's easier to screw up the rotation, even though it's so nicely timed. So the rotation with the Greatsword basically is you will use your Scepter stuff, switch to Greatsword, and you'll Whirling Wrath. As soon as the first thing you do when you swap to Greatsword is Whirling Wrath, then you'll drop your Symbol of Wrath, and then at that point your Purging Flames will be off cooldown, so you'll use your Purging Flames and then whirl with your Whirling Wrath again in your Purging Flames, doing a bunch of Whirl Finisher in your Field of Fire. So that's an extra little bit of burning, and then that's when you switch back. It's pretty almost exactly timed, which is nice. The only issue is that when you're back on Scepter, you have to be real quick about the timing of your Zealot's Flame, because you'll be using it twice when you swap to Scepter, and then before swapping back to Greatsword, you'll use it twice again. So there you go. That's why it's not quite there yet. It's still quite nice. I mean, I did a raid with Teapot on it the other day. It was approximately the same damage as the new beautiful Condi Warriors. The Condi Phalanx Strength Warriors, I think they were. So yeah, that's pretty much in line.
That face on Boots is top DPS. Lol.
It did start to improve when there were some extra targets around, but there aren't that many multi-target fights in raids these days. There's maybe 30% of them or something like that have viable multi-target fights that you could really shine on, but not that many. So we'll see. We'll see how raiding ends up in the future, and we'll see if this build gets buffed in the ways that I said. Hopefully it does. If it doesn't before the expansion, it might be because they're going to come out with an elite spec that is purely or more better for Condi, for a Guardian. Maybe that's how they're going to buff it, because if that happens, you can totally drop Zeal, because these are good traits, but they're not like, you don't hinge on them. Because even though you'll lose your symbol, your Sword of Justice with this trait, it's not that bad. You could replace it with other things, and yeah. So hopefully that could be a thing. And there you go. So I guess I'll move on to the other builds. Okay, so I'm back, and this time around we're going to be talking about the Elementalist. So Elementalist, has never been a slouch in the raiding scene, except for, at the very beginning when people thought it was too squishy. So it does quite a bit of damage on power Elementalist, like a ridiculous amount of damage. It's also got some healing potential. Now, the Elementalist I'd like to talk about is the Condi Elementalist, which on a large hitbox is not so bad at all. On a small hitbox it's also not that bad, but Condi Elementalist also concentrates on fire, and it can do it could do 34, 35k. I don't have the best gear either. I have some exotics, but it could do 35k, maybe even sometimes 36k on a large target. So that's no slouch. The only problem is it's just not quite as good as as another elementalist. So that's why it's kind of off meta right now. But there's two variations of the Condi Elementalist that I do want to talk about. The first variation is the pure damage one, which is Dagger Warhorn. The damage comes from this set of traits. So number one, you've got Burning Precision. You do some on critical hits, so you do some burning, and burning duration is increased. Then deal more damage while attuned to fire. You're going to be always attuned to fire with this build. And it also charges the cooldown of all fire weapon skills. That's very important. And then finally, Persisting Flames. It makes your combo fields, fire fields, last longer, which is also very important. That does a lot of damage. And when you blast a fire field, you get Fury, which is a nice little bonus. Then you're going to be doing Tempest. Tempest is basically just for the overload fire, which does quite a lot of damage. Here's some traits I use, like do 10% more damage when you overload and gain stability. Sand Squall, that will make it so that the boons on you sort of get increased and go to other people. You extend the boons on your allies. It's a nice little support thing. And this is pretty much nothing. Just gets you a fire field every little while. Now, a lot of damage, though, does come from the Arcane line because of this trait, Elemental Surge. You could also use this one, but it's a lot more difficult to use because in fire, when you dodge roll onto somebody, you do 2 stacks of 12-second burning, which is quite a lot of damage, but it's a lot more difficult to use than this version. And this version gives you Elemental Surge. Every time you use an arcane skill or hit with an arcane skill, they, in this case, because you're in fire, take 10 seconds of burning, which is 5,000 something damage. It also increases your ferocity and also reduces the recharge of your arcane skills. So that is good for arcane power because arcane power applies 5 stacks of burning every time you use it. And then you can also use Arcane Brilliance, which is a combo finisher blast, giving you Fury and Might to other people when you blast in your fire field, and it also does the additional 5,000 damage of burning. For your utility skills, you're going to be using this, Signet of Fire, which does a ridiculous amount of fire damage, and you're going to be using Glyph of Elemental Power, which basically does a ridiculous amount of damage. Every 5 seconds, you're going to be doing an additional 6,000 damage on your hits because you're in fire. For your elite skill, right now I'm using Misfire Wolf. You're probably going to use Glyph Elementals or Conjure Fiery Greatsword, but the best obviously is, now that I'm a Sylvari, take Root, which does quite a bit of damage, maybe too much damage. That's why I'm not using it here in this demonstration, but yeah, it does a lot of damage. Your rotation will be, you want to use your Wildfire off cooldown as often as possible. Also, you're going to be using your Burning Speed off cooldown, leaving that fire field under them. And you're going to be using your Drake's Breath off cooldown. But your Drake's Breath is a lower priority than your Overload of Fire. And these guys are going to be used off cooldown all the time. And, of course, your Signet of Fire as well. And you're going to want to try to burst inside your fire fields. And then whenever you have a chance, like if everything's on cooldown, use Heatsink to spread your Might and Fury to everybody else. Not bad. Pretty easy rotation. Like, way too easy maybe. Okay, so now I'm back with the other Elementalist condition build that I wanted to talk about. And it's not a complete... It's a bit of a reduction on the amount of damage you did on the last one. But the trade-off is for giving out Might to people as well as Fury, which is something to consider because it's not a terrible idea. Just a quick change in a sigil and food, and now you have 50% boon duration, which is not a lot, but it's all you need to give out 25 stacks of Might and unlimited Fury to everybody. Now, I guess, so I'm not going to put any boons on me. The only boons I'm going to put on myself is quickness, because you need that. And so in this way, the Elementalist, just like the Condi PS Warrior, can swap as needed to either a might giving build or a damage dealing build. So the Condi Warrior can become a Condi PS Warrior and vice versa. So a little bit of versatility there with this, with the scepter instead of a dagger. And the way you get might to everybody is through blast finishers in your fire fields. You have a ton of blast finishers with this build. You have your Dragon's Tooth almost all the time. You got your Phoenix. You've got the Arcane Brilliance. It's quite a bit of blast finishers, so you'll be giving quite a lot of might to everybody. Unfortunately, it does rely on blast finishers, so if you're blasting the wrong fields, it's not going to be giving enough might to everybody. So that is the one deterrent to this. But yeah, as you can see, the DPS is definitely lower than it was on the other one. But it's not too low. It's around that of a PS Warrior, of a Condi PS Warrior. So there you go. I mean, that's the deal with this one. I don't know if it's worth it to I don't think it definitely doesn't replace a PS Warrior. Not only because it's the same damage as a Condi PS Warrior and does might as reliably maybe if you're lucky, but because the Warrior also brings those amazing banners to the table and empower allies. So that is definitely something that this guy is lacking. One last piece of the puzzle to consider is a hybrid between those two builds, and that is with Pyromancer's Puissance instead of Persisting Flames. And what this does is it gives you a much more reliable source of might than the blasting the fire fields. So you're going to be staying in fire the whole time, so this is going to be giving you 24 seconds of might every time you use a skill while you're in fire. And it's going to be a lot more reliable than blasting fire fields. So that allows you to use a dagger instead, which is a lot more damage, but it means you're going to lose a lot of damage because Persisting Flames is actually quite a large damage increase. But it's a trade-off. So you're gonna get around 28k DPS, more damage than with the Scepter, Scepter Warhorn, and you don't even need to take root for that 28k damage. And so there's that, but you lose the Fury. So yeah, there you go. I mean, it's something to consider though. It's just a little bit off meta. All these builds are just a little bit off meta, and for good reason. They might need a little bit of love, but I don't know. I don't know if they're even... Sometimes you have to wonder if it's even necessary to buff certain builds. And in this case, I don't know. In the Condi Guardian, I really want it to be buffed. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoy these builds, and I'll talk to you later.